Anneliese Hadeler, a woman whose name is not widely known. However, those who recognize it know that her story is far too vast to capture in a few minutes. Anneliese Hadeler was born on May 10, 1930 in Koszalin, a small town in East Germany, but is now Koszalin, a part of Poland. She was adopted into her family. Her mother Eva was a nurse and her father Otto was a butcher, who eventually was made to build warships in Stettin. She also had a younger brother, and she loved to play and run as a kid. She would ride her bike everywhere she went. Growing up in World War II, Anneliese was told not to speak of the war no matter where she was or who she was with. She risked being taken from her family. And because they lived near a war prison and prisoners would break out and attack citizens, she was warned not to go with any men she did not know. During the war, Anneliese was lucky enough to live about 10 miles from the Baltic Sea. She was able to eat every day with plenty of fish and vegetables that her mother grew. When she was a young teenager, she would walk through the city and look at all the posters in the windows. They would show endless propaganda on what the Russians would do to citizens if they had lost the war, or pictures of Polish soldiers killing Germans at the border. She had no reason not to believe it. There was never any mention of what the Nazis did to the Jews. At about 14 years old, the war was in full throttle, and Anneliese was sent to work as a nanny for a family whose father was a soldier. The family had 3 young children in Bauernhofen. It was close to the beach, but about 20 miles from home. She usually went home by train once a month to visit her family. On one of her visits home, her father was also home from Stettin, but when it was time to leave, her mother begged her to come home before they had to flee so they could leave together. She left for the train with her father, who would leave for Stettin from the same station. This time was different. He flooded her with advice and asked her to take care of the family. She waved goodbye as the train left and hadn't heard from him since. Little to their knowledge, Otto was drafted to the Volkssturm and was killed sometime in 1945. When Anneliese returned to the family, she received a letter that her brother was in the hospital because of an accident doing charity work with Hitler Youth. She begged her employer to leave, but she wasn't allowed. Then all mail and transportation services in the area were completely frozen. She could not write to her mother or take the train home. Everyone was trying to flee west to West Germany. However, she was going east to meet her family, as her mother had asked. On her 20-mile walk in the snow, soldiers and civilians warned her that Koszalin was almost completely surrounded, and the Germans could not hold them off. She continued anyway, and when she finally reached her home, there were Hungarian soldiers there, and her mother and brother were nowhere to be found. She frantically ran through Koszalin, shouting their names over the gunfire from surrounding mountains. She went to the church, her family's meeting place, and they weren't there either. Across the street, she caught a glimpse of what looked like her mother and brother, and they were finally reunited. They got on the back of a wagon and headed towards the sea, where there were boats transporting people further west. Eventually, there were Russian tanks that started firing at the surrounding wagons, and there were explosions from grenades everywhere. They jumped off the wagon and took cover. Through the commotion, Anneliese saw a meat truck approaching. She stopped the driver and frantically begged that he let them on. He eventually gave in, and they escaped. When the truck could not go on any further, Anneliese spotted a small airport where people would be picked up. They all went to the plane as fast as they could, and after about 30 minutes in the air, they needed to have an emergency landing. The right wing was on fire. From there, a bus picked up passengers and brought them to a Red Cross train that would go towards Hanover. They boarded the train and were stopped mid-ride. They were told to get off as they heard planes overhead, and the far side of the train was hit with a bomb. They were lucky again. Even though the train had a red cross, meaning it was a civilian train and should not be attacked, it was still bombed. The train could not go any further, so they decided to walk to a small town called Bremerverde. This town produced no military products and had not been targeted. However, they all spoke a northern dialect of German. This Anneliese could not understand. In Bremerverde, they were given food and water, and people were offered to go to the farmland nearby, a small village named Alfstadt. Anneliese and her family took the opportunity as they had some experience in farming. When they got there, they were taken in by a family of 6. The father was in the German army, and they had a small farm with cows and pigs. Anneliese would stay there when the peace treaty was signed on her 15th birthday in 1945, and throughout high school when she met Karl. In In her early 20s, Carl was given the opportunity to move to America and gain citizenship through the American Army. Shortly after, Anneliese went to Canada, where they got married and moved into a small home in Hawthorne, New Jersey. Anneliese got her GED, graduated from nursing school, wrote a book, and had 4 children. The youngest was my mother. My Oma, or grandmother in German, raised my mother and my siblings with resilience, even after her husband died in my mother's early teens. I knew her as adventurous, hardworking, and creative. She traveled, went skydiving, cliff jumping, and was the most famous crochet master at her local senior center. She had an amazing vegetable garden that we always needed to help her with whenever we'd visit, and she made the best marmalade, similar to the kind her mother brought with them on the truck out of Custine. In the summer of 2018, I had the amazing opportunity to see my Oma's homeland. We visited Costline and found her church. I got to see Bremenwerda, Alstate, and the farm that she lived on with her family. I saw the same fields that she did, and I walked the same shores of the Baltic Sea. Anneliese Hadeler died from COVID-19 on June 30th, 2020. I'm so lucky to have had such an amazing grandmother. Her resilience and tenacity will live on through us, and her story will continue to be shared. I am proud of my heritage and the journey my family took for me to be who I am today. Her spirit is in my blood.